Well, in any case, if we're going to identify plants, we need to know how to speak the language. We need to know how to describe the plants so we can look up those terms. Well, it won't work for all plants. Some have very specialized parts with different names, so we're not going to cover the mosses that you see here. And we won't cover ferns either. A lot of the terms apply, but ferns don't have flowers. They have these spore-producing structures underneath, and so we'll leave them aside. The plant morphology we talk about is not really going to deal with grasses. They have some of the same parts, but they're all just their own unique thing. They are a flowering plant. Here are the flowers right here at the top. Most of the terms we talk about will apply to conifers, which will be a topic of several of the plants that we learn. And although they don't have flowers, so that those terms won't apply, they do have stems and leaves, although usually those are needles, and a lot of the other parts that would apply to most plants. Most of the plants we talk about will be flowering plants, like this golden currant. You can see the 5-petaled yellow flowers along the stem, as well as the bright green 3-parted leaves. Alright, so here's my nectarine tree in my backyard, stuck in my yard just like all of you guys are. So we need to know a little bit about what the plant looks like, its morphology, and we're going to start from the ground up. Normally we don't need to go into the roots. The only time you'd need to know about the roots is if it's a bulb. And please don't go digging these up. If it's the first thing to emerge in the spring, and the stems seem to come right out of the ground, and especially if it looks like a lily like this, then it's probably a bulb under the ground. We need to then progress to the stem and say, what does that look like? Is it woody or is it not? Does it have one trunk or does it have a bunch? And then going up the stems, we want to look at the leaves. Now, the leaves are only just barely appearing. Let's see if we can find them over here. Yep, there they are. Flowers are there and leaves are just coming in. And so we're really going to work from the roots to the stems out to the leaves. And we'll talk a little bit about flowers, but that's such a big deal that comes in a separate discussion. So what is a leaf? Boy, that seems like an obvious question. Well, it's one of the more important ones in botany to figure out. And it actually takes a little bit of work to sort that one out. So let's say that is the stem. So how do we know what the leaf is? Well, let's draw a couple. The leaf is the green thing off the stem, right? Yeah, that's a nice simple leaf. And so here we have the leaf stalk or the petiole. And we have the leaf blade. Really nice, simple leaf, and there you go. This spot on the stem where the leaf comes out is called the node, and this space between leaves, predictably, is the internode, the space between the nodes. At the node, we're also going to find this bud. That's a meristem, and that's where new growth can occur. So that's a pretty important thing. And when we find this bud down here, then we know that everything off of here is a leaf. Sometimes these are really obvious and large and you can see them, other times not at all. Sometimes you also have a little bit of leafiness, sometimes even spines down here, not particularly well drawn in this case, but that is a stipule. So if you see a little leafy weird structure or a spine along the main part of the stem, that's probably a stipule, and you know that whatever else you have out here is a leaf. Okay, well, so far nothing about this seems particularly odd. Well, we know that these leaves often have veins. That probably doesn't seem too strange to you. Okay, so let's draw another node here with a leaf coming out. and a bud here and maybe some stipules. And we draw the veins of the leaf. But what if this time that blade looks like this, is all divided up instead of being one nice well-behaved blade like that one? What if it's divided into pieces? Is this one right here, is that a leaf? No, it's not. It seems a little strange. So each of these guys would be a leaflet. This whole structure is the leaf because it comes from the main stem, has a bud there. The veins come out through this midrib. They branch out, but each of these is a leaflet, and the whole thing is a leaf. We could even have one, I'll make it kind of simple, where we have even leaflets along these stems. And that's really dissected. Probably starts looking kind of fern-like to you, and you're absolutely right, is that this whole structure is the leaf. It's just been divided up into tiny little leaflets on this vein coming out of this midrib, coming out of this stem with the bud at the base. But that's how we define a leaf. Pretty important to know what a leaf is, because we need to classify them as a simple leaf or a compound leaf. And this is a once compound leaf, and this is twice compound, or sometimes bipinnately compound. You can also have a leaf that is palmately compound, and it looks like the palm of your hand. It kind of radiates out from one spot into little leaflets. Looks kind of like a flower, but these would be leafy parts coming out there. So that would be a palmately compound leaf, whereas this one would be pinnately compound. A pinna refers to feather, and if you look at this, it looks kind of like a kind of clunky feather. So on this viburnum shrub, we can see a distinctly opposite arrangement. So we got a woody stem coming out of the base there, and when we look at an individual stem, then you can see that the branches come out opposite, and the leaves are opposite each other as well. Look at that one right there. Those leaves are right opposite each other, and since at the base of every leaf is a bud, then that's where the new branches come out. Looking at a few leaf shapes, that's going to be important for us as well. Some of them are roughly egg-shaped, and so we call that ovate or egg-shaped. May seem like a strange term, but if you think of an ovary that produces ova or eggs, egg-shaped kind of makes sense. Another one is a little narrower that we'll see sometimes. Looks like the tip of a spear or a lance. And so that's lanceolate. Another one that's a little even, notice that the ovate one is widest down here. If it is pretty much football shaped and widest right in the middle, then that one would be elliptical. And if it's a nice line, or I guess you call it needle-like, but some of them are kind of wider than a needle, and that one would be linear. And there are quite a few other ones. You got round leaves and such. There's some where, obviously this is the petiole, the leaf stalk. Sometimes instead of being ovate, it's widest above the middle. It's kind of a reversed ovate, and So that one, the technical term for that is obovate. And different books use different terms to get around that, but oblanceolate would be widest above the middle, etc. So a lot of different terms, but it's important to understand the leaf shape. And this is one of the things to learn to speak botany that you need to know is leaf shape is important. Just like eye shape for people, leaf shape tells us how to identify a plant. But what about this edge? Like the margin of a paper, the margin of a leaf tells us a little bit about what does the edge look like. Maybe you've noticed this, maybe you haven't, but if it's smooth, like this one, we could call it entire. It's a more technical term for it. And we could also just call it smooth. Sometimes that leaf looks like this, and that would be lobed. And so we'll see some leaf margins like that. Some of them look like they're toothed. And so we could call it toothed, or we could call it dentate, which kind of makes sense. Dentist, dentate, toothed, that works. If these get nice and sharp, then we could also call it spinose. They're leaf margins that are just small and wavy. They're not exactly lobed, so crenate would be a term for that one. A whole bunch of others as well. So there's lots of different terms we might use to describe leaves and the different parts of them. A few others to pay attention to if you're really trying to identify a plant is the color of the leaf. Is it bright green? Is it lime green? Is it dark green? Is it red? And then the top and the bottom of the leaf are likely to look different. Sometimes they're very important characteristics. Usually the bottom is a little bit lighter. There's lots of stomata, those little breathing holes there. And so sometimes it looks very different. Along with that color, you might note is their fuzz, their hairs on the top, the bottom, both, or is there none? That's a pretty important one as well. The top and the bottom of the leaf might look different. And so we want to pay attention to, is that tip pointed? Is it rounded? Is it really long pointed? Or is it just a short point? And the base, does it come in like this? Is it perfectly round? Does it come in taper? There's lots of different ways that the base might come about. So knowing the full description of the leaf really helps in noticing the details that will help you identify it. I provided you a handout in the lab that outlines many of these terms. But let's take a look at a few plants and practice together. This is kinnikinick. It has alternate leaves that are obovate in shape with smooth margins. Here we have a phlox plant coming up. You can see its stems right here and two simple leaves coming out opposite one another. A little bit of hair at the base, but doesn't look like any stipules there. But every single time around the stem, each of the leaves is opposite one another. So here we have an herbaceous vine. These are hops coming up in my yard, and we can see they have simple leaves, and each leaf, kind of like the hand, is palmate. Now it's not compound, it's a simple one, but the veins do run out from this single point down here. These guys, worth zooming in a little bit to take a closer look. See this part right here? So that little leafy bit on the stem, that is a stipule. There's some wild strawberry plants in my backyard. These have compound leaves. They all come out of the base, and we have 1, 2, 3 leaflets on this leaf coming out of the very base, and you can see the margins are very toothy here. But just from kind of about halfway on up. All right, so what do we make of this plant? Where is its stem? Oh, wait a minute. It doesn't have one. That's odd. So not all plants have a stem right away. This one we'd call the leaf arrangement basal. So it all comes out of the base. And in this case, out of here in the middle of each of these clusters of leaves is going to shoot a flowering stem, and it'll come right up like this. Then we'll have a stem, but right now we don't. All we have is a bunch of leaves coming out of a really, really short stem way down in here. But we might as well talk about this leaf. So the leaf goes all the way to the base. If we pull it out, then we see that we have a palmately compound leaf. Kind of looks like the palm of a hand, right? And so it's not just one leaf blade, but a leaf blade that's dissected into all these different parts. The parts of a flower, let's just go over the basics. We first have the sepals. They look kind of like leaves. These are a little reddish at the base. Then the petals, the showy parts. Sometimes they're obvious, and these are really nice and big. Most of the plants in your yard are going to have really crazy, monstrous flowers or something really obvious. Plants in the wild are not quite so cooperative. All right, let's look at this guy here then. Then inside of the petals, we have these stamens, the male parts, and they produce the pollen. And then this one little strand here in the middle, that guy is the pistil, and the pollen sticks there and it goes down to the base and the ovary, and that's what will produce the nectarine in this case. And so we've got four main parts: the female part, the male parts, and then the showy parts around the petals and the sepals, which are mainly there to protect the flower when it's in bud. So that's the basics, really. You got what you need to start. My suggestion is you go out and start asking, what's that? What's that? And do your best to try to identify each plant.